to episode 298 of the Refuse Fascism podcast, a podcast brought to you by volunteers with Refuse Fascism. I'm Sam Goldman, one of those volunteers and host of the show. Refuse Fascism works to unite all who can be united in mass nonviolent resistance in the streets and throughout society to drive the Trump fascist regime from power. This week, I'm so glad to be joined by Mark Tinkelman, one of the producers of the pod, my husband, focusing on elections because that's all y'all seem to care about. Well, not you, dear listeners, but really everyone else. Before we begin, if you appreciate this show, help us reach more people. Rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Share this episode after listening, of course, and consider becoming a paid Substack subscriber or joining our Patreon community. Links to both are in the show notes. Every bit of support helps us keep going, keep growing, and continue to bring the demand that the Trump fascist regime must go now to society as a whole. And we need to expand that effort rapidly. I know you agree. So please, whatever you can do to push this out to your network, to your world, so appreciated. With that, here we go. Welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, I'm always glad to be here.
I am so glad that we are having this conversation. We had a conversation that was like this with organizers recently. I thought it was really clarifying. I wanted to get into it more with you. But before we do, I wanted to kind of set the stage, if you will. We've said since Trump won a basic truth that this regime imperils all of humanity and the planet itself. And we've said from the get that this is an existential danger to not only people living in this country and livable ecology here, but all around the world. And that all of humanity and a livable world for anyone is at stake here. One of the things that we've frequently been talking about is that much of the excuses that people give for inaction result in waiting, that they are all ways of waiting and accommodating and thinking that that won't really happen. That worst case scenario, that catastrophe won't happen, excusing all that has happened, right? And what they say they will do. And one of the things that I just wanted to start with is what is actually at stake for this planet? What has this regime already done and putting into motion that will, if we are able to wrench power back from these fascists or out of the hands of the fascists, will be a monumental effort to undo?
Yeah, I mean, we saw a lot of their program for the globe, but it is important to back up. These fascists did not create global warming, but it is no coincidence that at the moment where we understand it most deeply, where it's beginning to affect people in mass all around the world, and where we know on very firm scientific grounding that this is a trajectory of horror, it's no coincidence that in this moment, fascism is coming to the fore. In May, global average CO2 reached 432.3 parts per million. That's a record for a monthly average. I'm not that old, and I remember when 350 was this threshold that if we could stop it before then we have a chance. And the fact is, it's not that we were wrong about that. People were very right that that was a threshold, and every day past that and every increase past that means decades, best case scenario, of struggle to mitigate and to make this planet just barely livable in the near future, within the next few centuries at most. This week, we saw extremely rare tornadoes in China, with flooding exceptionally extreme. We saw this week triple-digit temperatures descended across huge swaths of North America, along with particularly intense storms. Here in Philly, yesterday, we had these things called microbursts, 4 of them, which are essentially like inverted tornadoes. They collapsed buildings, they tore down humongous trees, they ripped roofs off of buildings. This is not normal. Europe is seeing weeks on end of record-breaking temperatures. Nigeria is experiencing devastating flooding. All across the world, we're seeing what's happening as a result of human-made climate change. And every day that business as usual continues, these changes are locked in for years to come, and they're literally just the tip of the iceberg. But it's not just business as usual. It's fascism, which means that the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the exponential expansion of pollution and extraction, all of this is going into overdrive. In the last few years, we've seen the fascists strip the EPA of most of its power, with the Supreme Court deciding that watersheds sort of just don't exist in order to lift protections on rivers. And Trump's EPA had rescinded the foundational scientific finding that greenhouse gases warm the earth. We've seen the administration open vast areas of Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico to extraction. They've gutted the U.S. Global Change Research Program that acts as an umbrella organization for over a dozen federal agencies to coordinate research on climate change. And now, similarly to the Supreme Court's finding that rivers aren't affected by what happens around them, Trump's Departments of the Interior and Commerce this week instituted a rule that says endangered animals don't need habitat.
What the fuck?
They just don't need them. In reality, most endangered species are not like hunted to extinction. That's
right,
not.
They're endangered because their habitat has been demolished.
And this means that the most common and important impact of the Endangered Species Act is the prevention of habitat destruction. And now these fascists have categorically ended habitat protection. This affects all kinds of construction. It affects all kinds of industrial use of land, all kinds of things. Every single day, this is going to have actual impacts. And additionally, the regime has tapped a climate change denial hack from PragerU. That's the only place that this person has been able to have a job for the past few years. He was essentially kicked out.
By climate science hack. It is a global warming denialist in 2026.
Yep.
So we can only assume that he is a Christian fascist.
Also very much for oil and gas. I don't know which one is his,
that is their environmental policy, is drill, baby, drill, while the planet is burning and gutting any protections that would in any way mitigate that nightmare.
This guy has been tapped to oversee the federal government's flagship report about climate impacts on the UN.
It's not just disdain for expert, which is a integral part of fascism. There cannot be truth except the truth that we declare. And our declaring it makes it true. The hatred of science. But it's like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy here of just how serious this is. It's like a vampire in charge of investigating where all the blood is disappearing from.
Yeah, it takes the vampire in charge of the blood bank to the next level. And I think this is the last point I want to make about this, and we'll get more directly into the elections. But as monumental as all of this is, everything I've just described still sort of pales in comparison to their next proposal, which is to run all federal funding through the fascist political operatives at Russell Vought's Office of Management and Budget. Vogt was a lead author of Project 2025, and he's been a longtime fascist ideologue. And with his appointment to the head of the OMB, he's transformed a traditionally obscure office within the executive branch into essentially a shadow legislature, effectively seizing the power of the purse from Congress and subjugating it to the regime's fascist directives. That's what's on their agenda next, very immediately. So global warming is happening. We're all confronted by a choice to let this play out or stop it. And it's at this moment, it's no coincidence that it's at this moment that we have fascism in the White House. And so obviously the first order of business, if we don't want to just let this play out, is to remove this regime from power. I think that's good grounding for the rest of this conversation about this.
It's important to start here because I really think people do not want to confront the stakes at the moment. Those who do, which I think we'll have to talk about in another episode, but those that do are confronting it are primarily filled with despair, which I think is a separate conversation.
Impacts this.
Oh, it totally impacts this. I mean, how many times can you say this? If you refuse to look at what you actually face, you're going to come to a different conclusion of what you need to do. The point that you're getting at, which we could link in, the fact that this regime is relaunching, if they ever really stopped, could be argued, a illegal, immoral, illegitimate war on Iran, that has environmental impacts. It's throwing things into motion that we can't even fully comprehend the consequences of, or at least I can't fully comprehend.
I mean, it could make this all moot if it unleashes the kind of nuclear war that is very possible as a result of their actions.
Exactly. And even if it doesn't, I mean, the military is the top emitter of global warming. And I think that there's a need to look at, again, why it is that we say we can't wait. Part of that why is that these things are happening now, and most people do not understand this. Like almost everything else he's done, it's to upend any other ruling mechanism besides Trump. You know, it is the Congress. What? It is the just complete unitary executive. That is why I think having conversations about what can and what cannot contain or defeat this fascism.
Yeah, we have to have serious conversations.
And those conversations cannot proceed from make-believe.
But guess what? So many of them do. And I think that it's really important. We should get really into what it is that the decent people in this country are being sucked into, what we've been trained, us too, have been trained our whole lives to see as the mechanism of change, and which is being propagandized right now, which is the only thing that you can do about fascism is put all of your efforts, all of your energies into elections. I think based on everything we've said and based on everything that I think we're about to talk about with the fascist strategy towards these elections, which I think people really need to grasp and internalize that that's happening, I think it's worth laying out the two main opposition strategies around these elections that are, to be blunt, not only insufficient, but are misdirecting people's energies and passions and their anger and outrage at what's happening.
Yeah, and I don't mean this to sound cruel. And I have a tremendous amount of compassion, not just compassion, but like there is willful blindness, but there's also like what people are doing, what they're being led to think. At the same time, we are wasting time we do not have. It is not a phrase that we like to use, like history says that you have to stop fascism before it becomes too late. Well, why? It becomes entrenched. It becomes consolidated, meaning that the mechanisms that you could use to contain it, to hold the worst at bay even, like they're gone. And those who resist are locked up, they're silenced, they're killed, and it's normalized.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
I mean, let's just say the fact that there are not thousands, let alone tens of thousands in the streets protesting the murder of Lorenzo Salgado Arejo is evidence of that normalization. And again, I'm not saying it to be like mean, but we got to be real about what time it is.
I think that there's two sort of camps of the opposition strategies that are being taken up and pushed out. And a lot of times there's overlap. But the first one is a blue no matter who strategy. And I've already seen it phrased in many ways, including ways that sound really good, of like, we need the biggest united front possible. United for what and to do what is a really important question, because no matter how many Democrats are elected in the midterms, like, I don't want to dwell on like worst case scenarios, which are very possible, that like the Republicans just sweep. That's not impossible with everything they've put into place. But this strategy of we need the broadest united front, every time that it's brought up, it's explicit that it's the broadest united front behind the Democratic Party candidates, behind the Democratic Party leadership. And no matter how many seats get flipped, there is no mechanism that means that Trump is contained, let alone removed. This is a man who's been impeached twice, and yet it's never gotten to the supermajority necessary to remove him, and it won't via the midterms. This is a regime that is installed that has, even when they've had a Republican majority in the House and the Senate, they've sidelined the legislature to such an extent that it is ornamental at best. This is a regime, again, fucking squirrel. Sorry, Richie. I'm not going to do anything about it.
What's distracting us, y'all, is that out of our window, you know, Mark plants these beautiful flowers and vegetables, and we are now witnessing a maniacal squirrel going to town on, what is he going to town on?
I can't even tell.
Bang on the window.
There you go.
It does scare him.
All right.
Okay, go ahead.
Right. So yeah, there's no way that via the midterms, this regime is contained or removed. You know, no matter how many Democrats, and Again, we're talking about the Democratic Party, which has John Fetterman in it. We're talking about the Democratic Party, which consistently cannot actually bring their own people together to do what needs to be done to remove this regime. And I think that that's a really important thing. And then, so there's the blue no matter who strategy. And then there's the transforming the Democratic Party strategy. And, a lot of this has to do with, the DSA's strategy, but it's not contained to that. And essentially, this is this notion that, yes, the Democratic Party has not up until this point done what needs to be done to contain or remove fascism. But it's this notion that somehow, just by changing some of the people in the Democratic Party, very gradually, to be clear, we can change what the Democratic Party actually exists to do.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
I just think it's important to really explain their strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So the main Democratic Party strategy has not been this round to really even mobilize people based on their outrage against the Trump regime, the hunting of non-white immigrants and locking them up in concentration camps if they don't just shoot them down in the street. It is not to mobilize people against the erasure of trans kiddos. Mm-hmm. It is not stop the wars. It's not any of the actual program. I'm not saying I want to be a Democratic Party strategist, or I think that we should spend our time being they should be campaigning this way. But their main thing is affordability. I mean, on one level, it's just friggin' morally bankrupt. Look, a lot of German people during Nazi Germany that weren't Jews.
A lot of Aryan people in Germany.
That weren't the people that were in the concentration camps.
Things became much more affordable for them because it was being made by slave labor. That's how that worked.
So affordability, morally bankrupt, but also doesn't take the fascism out of the fascism, and then becomes a way that you're really accommodating and smoothing things over for, guess what? Fascism. So that's the main strategy. As a key part of that, there is a notion that is activating and animating a lot of people, especially young people who are concerned about the climate and everything we talked about at the beginning, who are full of heartache over the genocide in Gaza, who are looking at a future that is bleak, if not existent, and they want to see people that they feel are fighting for the future. And if people just had a bit more fire in them and were, quote unquote, talking about the issues or whatever that they care about, then that would advance things. Now, a lot of this changing the Democratic Party strategy isn't going to change who is in the White House. It's a long game. It's a long, long game. The key players are Mamdani, are the new mayor in DC. Sorry, squirrel tap. He's fearless. He is fearless. He is still going after it. I'm trying to remember the other places where they went, but they've won in some local areas, and they're going for a strategy of at the local level. The idea is you'll get more of these local leaders. They'll transform the Democratic Party from the inside, an inside out strategy or whatever that's called. We could have a separate conversation, and people should, on the nature of the Democratic Party, on the reality that revolutionary leader Bob Avakian says, the more you try to make the Democratic Party what you want and think it should be, the more that you will become what they actually are. Could have a whole conversation on that and why that is not an effective strategy. And you don't need to agree with that to be part of Refuse Fascism. One thing that you do need to get, I think, if you want to refuse fascism, is that strategy is out of sync with what time it is.
Yes.
It is completely out of sync with how fast this regime is moving and the magnitude of change. You are trying to change a party that will work with norms and institutions and rule of law that this regime has proven time and time again it does not care about. And while you're making this I want to change the Democratic Party strategy happen, this regime is crushing everything good and decent. They are going to annihilate. And there is something where I think people are well, he's talking about us. So therefore we're doing something right. Yeah, there's nothing stopping him from, at this point, like what he wants to do, what he said he wants to do is put all of put the DSA, which are not communist, into exile. I think that we do have to are we talking about the same problem? Because I don't think we are.
No, I think that really hits it on the head. There's multiple levels of this. I think there's the three overall thing is I think that there is a unity between these two strategies of blue no matter who and transform the Democratic Party. Both of them are telling you to wait. That's A, which I think Sam just talked about very powerfully. Two, it obscures and runs roughshod over the power of the people, which I think we should get into. And three, I will say, look, the Democratic Party right now, especially, you were saying that the regime is actively destroying everything positive and good. And they're also destroying the Democratic Party. Trump made clear in his July 4th, or the speech on July 3rd,
the Mount Rushmore speech,
that if they pass the Save America Act, they won't lose an election for 100 years. So who the fuck cares what the Democratic Party runs?
My 100-year rank is coming.
And I'm not saying that he's just all powerful, but in this realm, they have the upper hand. In the electoral arena,
they have the initiative.
They absolutely have the upper hand.
Not only do they have every lever of power right now, they also have the...
Yeah, and the Electoral College is in their favor, and all the things that they're doing to destroy what has been, to some degree, the integrity of the elections. It's not going to matter who the Democrat is as long as these fascists are in power. Right now, especially, the Democratic Party has been a representative of Big Scary, the ruling class, of a section of the ruling class for its entire existence. That section's changed a lot. And for the last 50 or so years, they've been a representative of the section of the ruling class that wants to have some level of inclusivity, that wants to give people a certain amount of rights, essentially buying off the people in this country in order to maintain an empire over the rest of the world. And right now, especially with this transformation towards fascism, the Democratic Party represents the entirety of the mainstream of the ruling class. The system and the form of rule that they have instituted ever since the Civil War, essentially. They are representing stability. That is order over justice. That is their role right now in particular, as strategically and long term, as a representative political body of sections of the ruling class. And I think that people do need to really dig down into how this works, because look, Trump got to where he is through the normal mechanisms of this country's democratic process. And that should really cause people to think very deeply about what those mechanisms are, who they serve, what they represent. And I think that it's, as Sam said, this isn't something that everyone who's going to be part of the movement to stop fascism needs to agree on. But look, it is a grounding fact that the more people who understand that and who recognize that, the better position we will be in.
Yeah, and I just want to say this isn't about shitting on the Democratic Party to shit on the Democratic Party. I think that we would have to be smoking something to think that the Democratic Party will lead the fight to defeat this fascism.
Absolutely.
When I use the word fight, I'm talking about political, I'm talking about nonviolent. I mean, they continue to be more scared a nonviolent uprising of the people and people questioning what is justice than they are of the fascists in power that are talking about annihilating them. Not just they never get power again, but they don't live anymore.
Right.
That they aren't part of society. And I think that doesn't mean that people who are Democratic Party leaders won't be part of the movement.
Right. It's not that they can't be.
Or won't be. It means that as a party, they can't be relied on to lead this.
Right.
There are individuals that are doing and saying important things, and they should be amplified what they're saying. And we should be going to those people about this strategy and what's needed. Right. And that's very different than relying on that party.
And waiting for the election. This is a big part of the meat of our conversation, but it's also the foreshadowing because we want to get into the fascist strategy. And, people are somewhat familiar with what we're about to talk about. The fascist strategy of legally rigging the elections, the fascist strategy of suppressing votes and changing who's able to vote, and all of this that we're about to get into. But I think that if you are thinking clearly about these opposition electoral strategies that we've just laid out and putting that up against this fascist strategy, it's a lot easier to understand how not only is an electoral strategy, again, insufficient, but actually in large part an obstacle to what needs to be done to defeat fascism.
So as we get into the next section, one of the things that I just wanted to just say is to recap some of what we were talking about. I just feel like it's important that we go through very simply. We're going to get into why the answer is the midterms. Voting is how we stop it is not only untrue because of what Mark laid out previously, but while you wait, fascism consolidates.
Yep.
We're going to get into why you can't confuse voting with a strategy against a regime that is already rigging, nullifying, and prepared for violence if they lose. We're going to also get into more evidence on why we have to change the Democratic Party through local elections is not serious about what time it is. And part of that is because of what the fascists are doing right now, how fast they're moving and the magnitude. I do want to say that there are many listeners who are, I agree with you. And that's why our focus needs to be impeach, convict, remove. And I just want to say we are for it. But where do those votes come from? Seriously, even if you get more Democrats, you're not going to get that, 64? They're not going to come through normal channels. They're not going to come from
just electing the right Democrats.
Right. They only come if millions of people create a political crisis through sustained nonviolent struggle demanding the removal of the regime. We basically are going to refute it can't get that bad, that I have to do this very scary thing called step outside of the normal channels. And we're going to do that by talking about what this regime is doing. And I want to say this is an analogy that someone else in Refuse Fascism shared several months back, but it's become more true, is what we are doing is so against what people hold dear as being an American means you have an electoral system, and that is how change is made. And it is, the civic religion. And what we are doing when we say we have to do more, which is what we are saying, we have to do more. It's equivalent in terms of response that we get to the doctors at these Ebola pop-up hospitals.
Right.
Where they are being violently attacked because they are burning bodies to save lives. And people are attacking them because it's against their tradition.
If your loved one dies and you couldn't even be there when they die because, they're so contagious, and then you have to burn their body. You
can't sit with their body.
I mean, that's horrific. And I understand why people, are extremely upset with the doctors who are imposing this and the forces who are imposing this. And yet, that's what needs to be done. And that's what needs to be done here.
Yeah.
This isn't a situation where there's people in the Congo who are so backwards they can't understand this. No, that's true. There's people here who are so backwards they can't understand what we're talking about right now. So I do think that it's an apt analogy.
Let's get into the fascist strategy in terms of how are they rigging, stealing the midterms while continuing to mobilize their hardened fascist base.
I mean, the Republicans have been suppressing votes and gerrymandering and all of this for decades.
But it is a new level. So let's first start with something that people might be familiar with, the Save America Act. The Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5 is what it feels like because he keeps pushing it. He will not let this die. He being Trump. He attempted to force the signing of the Save America Act by not signing a bipartisan affordable housing bill, which did become law without his signature. And we've talked about it before, but the Save America Act, quote unquote, please, requires photo ID at polling places, proof of citizenship before a person can register to vote. That passing this bill would, quote unquote, guarantee the midterms for the GOP is something that Trump has repeatedly said, and leaders of the Republican Fascist Party have repeatedly said. It is important to note that citizenship is already required under federal law, and documented cases of non-citizen voting, this whole voter fraud thing, is extremely uncommon. Folks can go to the Brennan Center for a whole report on it. Mike Johnson recently announced that he would make yet another attempt to pass the Save America Act through both the House and Senate, inserting it into legislation, authorizing a huge, a number that I cannot understand, military funding. And this is a reconciliation workaround, but that still wouldn't work in the Senate, is my understanding. I don't want to get people bogged down with procedural stuff, but we should basically expect Trump to again call for the firing of the parliamentarian in Senate who would be preventing like them from doing things that could be preventing things that like just are clearly against.
To reintroduce and then reintroduce like
the elimination of the filibuster, which he's already called for. And again, just to return to like what the stakes of the bill, why he wants it so bad, is more than 21 million Americans don't have ready access to the documents that would be required. Married women who've changed their names would face additional hurdles in their birth certificates no longer matching their legal names.
To be clear, everyone who's changed their name would face this hurdle. It's just that married women are the largest section of that. But obviously, trans people would also be affected by the exact same part of it. It would literally cut married women who've changed their name percentage points. This would be extremely important. And I think that a lot of people have this like, oh, well, yeah, he's tried to pass it 3 times and it hasn't worked. This man got through the quote unquote big, beautiful bill, which funded ICE for 4 years.
With a budget bigger than most militaries. The Trump regime is overwhelmingly employing tactics of intimidation and coercion after the legal bullying that they have attempted has mostly failed. Mostly, because there have been extremely important SCOTUS exceptions. Most impactful is the gutting of the VRA. But that is not the only way that they can go about things. The moves to suppress the vote, subvert, nullify, all of that are huge. So I want to share just like a line or two from a New York Times piece that covered the use of FEMA grants to leverage intimidation for state elections. And then I want to play what Mark Elias from Democracy Docket said. But the New York Times, reporting on July 7th, in an article titled "Administration Demands States Change Voting Rules or Lose Anti-Terrorism Funds," stated, quote, "The Trump administration is requiring states to change the way they conduct elections or risk losing tens of millions of federal terrorism prevention funds in its latest move that would make voting harder and undermine trust in results that don't go President Trump's way. The effort would force states to transition to paper ballots, verify citizenship of voters, and make other changes to election procedures according to Federal Emergency Management Agency documents," end quote. So we'll put the link to the full article in the show notes, but I want to play this Mark Elias clip because it does accurately capture like the vibe.
You know, I mean, Donald Trump is the mob boss showing up in the states and say, geez, it would be terrible if something happened to your state here at the hands of some terrorists. All you need to do is agree to our voter suppression program, and then you're in business. This is what we see him trying to do with the Postal Service and leverage that. It's what we've seen him try to do before in leveraging other parts of the federal government. It's what we're seeing with him trying to use the Department of Justice to prosecute his political enemies, right? All of this is Donald Trump using the tools of power, not for the purposes of advancing the safety and the interests of the American people, not for the purpose of making sure that states are safe from terrorism, but rather doing this because he views his only chance of holding power is to make it harder for people to vote and easier for him to cheat after the election.
Then this wasn't it this week. On Tuesday, the Justice Department sent letters warning election officials that they could face criminal prosecution if they knowingly allow non-citizens to remain on voter rolls or cast ballots, a thing that isn't happening.
But can easily be used to intimidate people because clearly, political prosecutions
exactly
are a key part of their agenda.
It went to all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and gave officials 5 days to explain how they will comply. Again, non-citizen voting, illegal.
And not happening.
Or happening at very, very, very low numbers. And I think it's important to note that they have yet to win a single lawsuit seeking access to state voter rolls.
And yet they keep trying.
Do you want to talk about the Election Commission?
Well, yeah. I mean, there is in this country a bipartisan election commission that oversees the integrity of elections. You'd think that's not a big thing. You'd think that's a normal thing. And yet Trump fired 2 out of the 3, the 2 Democrats who were remaining on this election board. As a result of that, the 1 Republican who was on this board resigned. So this board essentially doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I think it's important that people know that what they do and don't do. What they do is they provide federal grants to states to maintain the national voter registration forms, oversee voting system testing. The White House argued that Trump has the right to fire commissioners, and guess what he cited?
The Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court slaughter decision. I did want to share like a quote from Senator Alex Padilla and Representative Joe Morrell in a joint statement on what the stakes are. They said, quote, President Trump is trying to dismantle yet another independent guardrail of our democracy designed to keep elections fair and secure. Purging commissioners just months before the midterm elections and further gutting support for our state and local elections officials is a blatant part of his plan to politicize our elections and enable more unlawful and dangerous election interference, end quote. So these changes are going to put a lot more pressure in terms of administration and training activities on secretaries of state, because elections are in many states are at the state level, right?
Mm-hmm. But in many states, that means that the Secretary of State is the person who ultimately oversees it.
But my point was the administration of these happens at a local level and a state level. And so that's why that's going to cause more. Oregon Secretary of State Bias Reed, in a statement sent to Democracy Docket, had said, quote, this is yet another attempt by the president to disrupt and sow distrust in our elections. It's dangerous, it's reckless, and frankly, it's desperate. The president is looking for any opportunity to seize control over the upcoming election because he is afraid of facing real accountability from voters, end quote. This is important because people think that, oh, look, I don't want Trump to be operating from a position of strength.
Right.
Okay, got to start with that. And him operating from a desperate point is not safer.
Especially when he still will essentially have the same amount of power in many ways.
In what Reed is pointing to is that when they face setbacks or challenges or are weak, as we said in our statement, it compels them to escalate their attacks, to lock in their fascist program using every means at their disposal, unbound by domestic or international law. And that is when he lashes out with revenge and hatred and moral depravity. And this is because it is not only Trump. It is a whole fascist movement that has staked their whole future, everything that they care about, having this openly white supremacist, male supremacist, American chauvinist, Christian nationalist form of rule. They've staked everything on changing this form of rule. They're not going to give up power that easily. It's been described, this latest move, as a canary in the coal mine. And one has to ask, how many canaries
are we willing to sacrifice
before there's a change?
I think that this points to the fact that in all of their delusions, the fascists actually recognize something that many people on our side don't, which is that power in this country is not a popularity contest. That's not how it works. They are entirely fine with ruling from a position of a political minority, ruling over a majority that might be unhappy, but is not actually fighting.
Yeah. Also, you change that composition really quickly when you're a genocidal white supremacist carrying on an ethnic cleansing of non-white folks.
Yes.
You can change the voters. You can change the population.
And they're already stripping huge sections of people of that right before they get to the point where they're stripping them of their lives.
Right.
So,
I mean, they've already crossed the South. The Confederacy has risen again. So everything that we're talking about is already on top of like the Fulton County stuff, the raiding of the Ohio organizing. It's on top of all this other stuff. So we also have election monitors. Trump's Department of Justice announced Tuesday that it will send federal election monitors to 15 jurisdictions in 6 states during the 2026 primary season. The same day, the department sent letters to election officials nationwide threatening political criminal prosecution over this non-citizen voting thing that isn't happening. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division chief said that monitors are going to be sent to Arizona, Michigan, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Virginia. And this is happening in the context of this aggressive intimidation and coercion effort that the Trump DOJ is already under. It should say that this is not empty threats. They're threatening criminal liability for all 50 states if they retain these nonsense. It is mafiosa, as Elias said. And, the DOJ is calling for more people to watch elections. The only entity fucking with elections is this fascist regime.
I mean, I think
they're threatening already and to send ICE and other forces to be posted at the polls to terrorize Latino voters and others.
I think it's worth pointing out that these federal monitors and the potential ICE or National Guard that they send to these, I think that it's important to recognize how it echoes and turns on its head the federal monitors that were sent out at the end of Jim Crow.
Well, because there's a difference between monitors and observers.
What I'm saying is that any kind of federal force that's being sent out to election sites, their goal is intimidation. And I want to say that back then, it was to intimidate the white supremacists who were violently showing up to polling places and literally brutalizing Black people and preventing them from exercising their right. Today, when they're sending out federal forces to these elections, it is to intimidate anyone who could even be suspected of being an immigrant or being brown or being something or being Antifa or being something that this regime has criminalized.
I mean, think about what happened to the woman in Syracuse who posted an anti-killing of Renee Good post and was targeted at a polling place.
I mean, if you show up to a polling place where there's these federal monitors or ICE or whatever, and you have a shirt that says, "Fuck Trump," are they going to arrest you on the spot? That's not out of the realm of possibility with the direction that things have been going.
This is on top of placing truly insane fascist ideologues and key positions across the country, especially in these key areas. You know, these are election deniers are running elections. That is part of it. This is on top of the Postal Service moving to fuck with mail-in ballots, on top of the Department of Homeland Security compiling lists of voters, which could be purged ahead of voting. And one needs to just step back and be like, okay, so you have these elections and they're contested. He says, I won, or not I won in the midterms, but
we won.
But we won. He's already sowing in California and other places these fraud claims. Who decides? A Supreme Court stacked with fascists who given him immunity, who have given him more power than any president has or should possess. They're the ones that you're going to put your faith in. And then there is the paramilitary force. There is that Trump has unleashed his people. You know, I think it was just yesterday, on top of all these other pardons of January 6thers, they formally dismissed criminal cases accusing 5 Proud Boys of seditious conspiracy.
Yeah, these are 5 of the main actors. I mean, one of them was the guy who broke the first window in the Capitol in order to enable people to get in. Yeah, formally dismissed. There's this opposition strategy of focusing down on these elections in the most narrow way. And then there's the fascist strategy, which includes all of these parts of what they've attempted to do directly to the elections and election integrity and the way that elections are carried out. But their election strategy is entirely integrated into their full political strategy.
So I want to get back to what you're saying, but I also do think this paramilitary stuff is important. Like the fact that Patriot Front marched in the streets, the fact that they are getting so much promotion by the mainstream media, that's a separate conversation. Come talk to us. We were in DC too. But no, it is worth talking about because a group, I will not mention their name, put out in their email, picture of Patriot Front. They're voting. Are you?
Yeah, that was their headline.
They're voting.
They're voting. Are you?
Are you? Let's be clear. They are not preparing for voting. That is not their strategy. They are unleashed to be intimidating people now. They are intimidating people now. And they are preparing for violence later. If necessary. They are ready to carry out that genocide that is already underway through ethnic cleansing right now, through mass deportation. They will go through any length to institute fascism. This regime has shown that they will utilize lynch mobs to carry out violence to institute their full program. There's a reason why we call this fascism. They do have a base. They do have, yes, they have ICE, which has largely played the role of what a paramilitary would. They haven't needed the same thing because they have ICE. Most, the Proud Boys, etc., they are now part of ICE. If you're a white supremacist, you got a good gig now. They are training for overt violence, openly organized around a white ethno-state. I mean, I'm not going to play the garbage, but people should go and listen to what the leader of Patriot Front was saying.
Well, also, people, the media in their complicity has, put out some of these photos of Patriot Front, like on the subway and stuff. But there's a video that I think, has not gotten much play, where one of the Patriot Front people, somebody actually stood up and challenged them. I don't even know if this person was Jewish or not. But the response from Patriot Front was basically accusing Jewish people of sacrificing humans, of human sacrifice. That's who these people are. They're not preparing to fucking vote.
And we are not calling for the violence that they are calling for.
No.
We are calling for something very different.
Mm-hmm.
My point in bringing this up is to talk about you're not playing the same game.
Right.
They are not playing this game. They are not doing the, I have power, you have power. I have power, you have power. That's not the game. Accept election results, cute. That's where we're at. And I think your point, this is part of their whole fascist program is essential.
Mm-hmm.
Like what they're doing in elections is not different. I think you said they're purging from the voting polls before they purge them from existence.
Yeah.
I think that that's really heavy. And so I did want to talk a little bit about the war on immigrants.
And just a contrast, the New York Times, I think it was yesterday, had a whole piece from their editorial board about how, the Democrats are so into this electoral strategy, but like, what's their governing strategy? We don't even know, as the New York Times editorial board. And on the other hand, you just contrast that with the fact that the fascist electoral strategy, insofar as it's that, is entirely integrated with their strategy of mass deportations. It's entirely integrated with their strategy of mass terror. It's entirely integrated with their strategy of waging insane wars all over the world. This is one strategy on their part, and it's to maintain and expand and consolidate their power to institute a openly white supremacist, male supremacist, America first horror show. That's what it is. And it's entirely integrated.
And, I was thinking back to this conversation that we had with some organizers, and one of them was reflecting on that there's a need to really help people but just get that there is no easy way out. People are looking for an easy way out of this fascist stranglehold. And that doesn't exist. You got to break out of the confines of only the election question. We have to. And I think that there was a Rosie O'Donnell interview. I think she was talking with Jack Tapper. I never say his name right. On CNN.
Jake Tapper.
And I think that's who she was talking with.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is that she said in there, it is time, something like fascism's not coming. It's already here. And we've got to act like it, basically. And that now's the time to smash the glass on the fire extinguisher thing. Mm-hmm. And that is what time it is. Mm-hmm. This last week, ICE hit a horrific milestone. 2,000 arrests per day for multiple consecutive days. If this continues, this regime could achieve one of its longstanding aims: 1 million non-white immigrant arrests in a year. Just sit with that. Tens of thousands warehoused in concentration camps around the country, and hundreds of thousands deported. This is without any semblance of due process. This is with all the implications of that. Families ripped apart, children left without any representation. Because of this ratcheting up of mass deportations, they are planning on building a fleet of government-owned planes specifically to perform 24/7 deportations. As our listeners know, early on Tuesday morning, ICE agents murdered Lorenzo Salgado Arejo, a Houston resident who was a 52-year-old father of 3 who was, driving his construction crew to a job site on Tuesday when an ICE officer shot him on Canal Street in Houston's East End. Officials said that he wasn't even the intended target, but that he quote unquote resembled the target of an operation. So he was brown. The men that Lorenzo was driving have disputed the claims that, it's another self-defense claim, right?
Right, the weaponizing the vehicle claim. We've yet to see a single one of these actually hold up to scrutiny.
They've said there were no agents in front of the van, that he was not weaponizing his car. Mm-hmm. I think it's a good reminder of what they mean by self-defense.
What they mean by self-defense is if anyone does anything that they don't want them to do, they can shoot.
Exactly. Sasha Abramsky had wrote something that I thought was really well put regarding that script. Mm-hmm. Quote, "At this point, We know the script well. We know in advance how ICE will explain a shooting incident. The agency's spokespeople will immediately claim self-defense against a driver allegedly trying to run agents over. If there are rallies against the shooting, the government will label both the victim and the protesters as terrorists. And the Department of Homeland Security and the White House will back up ICE. In short, we know that the Trump administration has given ICE a blank check to do its worst. And we know that the Department of Justice won't even bother to pretend to investigate the killing, end quote. And I think that last part in particular is so important on why, like, yes, ICE out. And if we want to get ICE out, we have to remove this regime.
Absolutely. And I mean, they're constantly looking to expand how the impunity that they give to ICE agents, they're constantly looking how to expand that. And they're very literally doing that through this expansion that you pointed out to me of these joint task forces, where they're deputizing local law enforcement and state law enforcement. And part of what that does is it removes those people from their agency's rules of engagement.
Exactly. It's like a pathway to ICE. To get people who might tell you about a gun, you know, there's a shooting, and those people, those witnesses or whatever, share something with you about where they think that the gun came from. Well, I can now arrest those people to deport them. Even if my local thing has a sanctuary law and a witness can come and talk about a gun,
that witness can be deported because, you know, these federal agencies are deputizing the local law
They have the
enforcement.
same policing powers of an FBI agent. The Department of Justice can shield them from litigation or local oversight. They don't have to follow their own departmental regulations like body cams. And all these comes with, you guessed it, money. So there's incentive for more to do this. I think it's like Truth Out Piece said there's 200 such task force nationwide. And so there's hundreds of state and local and federal agencies working in these task force. But the biggest one is ICE and Homeland Security.
I mean, this is on top of the, 287 program where they're deputizing sheriffs to act as ICE.
This one is particularly ominous because these task forces have a ton of the track record of targeting Muslims and civil and human rights groups. And it operates on a pre-crime framework because of National Security Presidential Memo 7 and the 2026 counterterrorism strategy. It's directing them to target people whose ideology is quote unquote anti-American, my favorite, radically pro-transgender, and anarchist. And it has tasked these task forces in executing these claims. When they become part of it, they're responsible for carrying out those same directives. Yeah. Again, just like to emphasize what this has to do with immigration and mass deportation is that the largest participant by far and most active in these JTTFs nationwide is ICE.
And this is not separate from the elections. I mean, you know, the whole program of mass deportations and, you know, it goes along with this notion of mass denaturalization, which, you know, look, the Supreme Court ruled that birthright citizenship stays for now. So
to be undermined later.
Yeah, no, Kavanaugh made it very clear. It's good here, but, you know, you'll have one more vote if you just pass this.
You make it a law. He doesn't think that you need to change the Constitution because it's not in violation of the Constitution, right? As Ms. Stahl put it, lives to die another day. But it is an important win for now.
No, it's an important win for now. But it shows Trump is already saying that he wants a rehearing on birthright. He's already saying this.
Which is insane.
And if that goes through, the scope of his capacity to denaturalize voting citizens in this country would be unimaginable. I mean, he would be able to decide who votes. It would be that simple.
And so it's, again, you're really relying on this. That is really what you're...
Right, you're relying on just elections,
And then there is repression, which we've talked about before, but is really important because it's fundamental to fascism. That you cannot have dissent and you can't have reporters questioning your practice, which is why they're going after reporters incessantly.
Right.
You know, the New York Times said that several of their journalists had been subpoenaed by the DOJ over their reporting on Air Force One. It's why he attacks Maggie Haberman in a way that makes me feel like I really need to read this book. Yeah, I mean, we talked about how the deputizing of local law enforcement is feds. If we don't think that that's about going after political opponents of this regime, even those who write, right? Like, it's not about like
it's journalists, writers, activists, people who are parts of book clubs. It's also Democratic Party politicians. These are the people that they are already going after.
And it's all like about, it is thought crimes. It is thought crimes.
Right.
So this is not separate from what I alluded to earlier about Trump's anti-communist screed, while speaking in the Black Hills, which, let's just remember, how did the U.S. get the Black Hills? They violently seized it from the Sioux Nation in 1877 after Congress forced the tribe to cede land that it had been guaranteed under the treaty. Trump there went on to equate that alleged communist threat with immigrants whom he suggested could be expelled, pledging to, quote unquote, vanquish communism quickly, end quote, and, quote unquote, send them into exile. And this was to a cheering crowd.
Right.
Like, we have to get that it's not a big percentage of people that cheer for these things, and yet there is a base for this in this country. And that has everything to do with the history of a country that's founded in genocide and built on slave labor. And I just wanted to give some quick examples of this extreme escalation of political repression. The prairie land sentencing, which we talked on last week's episode, the federal government indicting 15 Minnesotans who participated in the profound solidarity movement in the Twin Cities against Operation Metro Surge. There are the 10 FBI raids against 8 pro-Palestinian activists in Michigan who are now facing felony conspiracy charges. There's the FBI raiding in the Ohio Voting Rights Organization. There's the poll worker in Syracuse who shared that she was confronted by DHS agents over social media posts she made criticizing the agent who murdered Renee Good. This looks like the raiding of an activist's house and then offering her $200,000 to be an informant on Antifa, which was recently happened in Texas, not too far from Prairie Land Detention Center. This is only a glimpse of what they are going for. And the point is not to scare people, but this needs to backfire into a mass movement of people coming to the defense of those under attack, coming to the defense of First Amendment rights, and people refusing the whole fascist trajectory and demanding the removal of the Trump fascist regime and nothing less than that. Because there's this whole situation and we're going to end similar to how we started. This is not limited to what happens in the U.S. This is not only about American lives. This is impacting the whole planet. And the fascism doesn't limit itself to what happens in these borders. So, Mark, I was hoping that you could talk about what the stakes are. What time is it happening across the globe?
Look, again, this isn't unrelated to the elections, but it is one more place where their whole strategy is integrated. They are restarting war on Iran. They've bombed Iran multiple times since the imposition of this so-called ceasefire. And now they're calling the ceasefire over. They're threatening Iran, saying that we've got 1,000 missiles pointed at Iran and will decimate every part of the country for a full year. They are, on one level, with the elections coming up, people talk about October surprises and stuff like that. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know what they're going to do any month.
Any day,
let alone
any
October.
Hour.
That could impact, the people of Iran. That could impact the people of the whole region. But that could also create a crisis on their terms that either some people say they couldn't cancel the election. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility.
No, not at all.
Or changes the dynamic, changes the voting dynamic, changes their capacity to repress people at home. We don't know the consequences that such actions could bring. But we do know.
It also has implications for the removal regime as well.
You want to talk about that, or you want to talk about Venezuela?
So I just do want to put out there that it's not only one dimension, that throughout all of these things, the people have tremendous power, but that power only exists insofar as we exercise it. And that only happens when we break out of the normal channels and we start demanding the only thing that matches this moment, which is the removal of the fascist regime. Is Trump must go now.
I think that's true. I think that there is potential for many of the things that they're doing to blow up in their fate, in the sense that it enables people to actually see the world clear and take the action that needs to be taken. I also think that their actions have the potential and are on track
to destroy the world. On track to destroy the world, 100%. But I'm saying that they also are going to create more and more splits within the rulers themselves.
That's true too.
And that presents more opportunity for the people if they exert it. But only if they non-violently enter the stage and raise this demand. And that becomes, what people are insisting upon, and that and nothing less all throughout society.
Back to the stakes of this whole thing, because it's not just about it's not even close to just about the elections. Their war moves are deadly on a massive scale. They've begun bombings of Iran. And there's also this piece about Venezuela, where there's a big New York Times expose today about how Marco Rubio is essentially colonially running Venezuela through the violent removal of their president.
Illegal by
on so many
any
levels.
rule. Their own rule, domestic law, international law.
They are very explicitly colonizing Venezuela. Within the regime, they're calling Marco Rubio the viceroy, which is a colonial term. And Marco Rubio essentially has control, according to this New York Times article, of both the investment and who's able to do business in Venezuela, and actually has control over the money, over when Venezuela exports their oil. That money is not now going to Venezuela. It's going into Marco Rubio and the State Department. And he is deciding where that money goes and if it goes and how much of it goes to what in Venezuela. That is the current condition. This is colonialism in 2026. Just naked colonialism.
And this is 100%, right? The Monroe Doctrine revitalized. He's deciding everything. He's shaping their whole...
He's vetoed social media posts by from their Department of State, from the Venezuelan Department of State. He's basically been an arbiter of who gets to be in the cabinet of the Venezuelan government. These are things that we just have to talk about because it's insane. This is part of the whole program. Not that we had Latin America, but in the past year, so many governments in Latin America that were not fascist have fallen. This absolutely is the Monroe Doctrine. They literally bribed Argentina to elect Javier Milei. And they are openly saying that they're going to make Latin America democratic again. And it harkens back to the Cold War, when any regime in Latin America that subordinated itself to the US, no matter how brutal and exploitive, was part of the so-called free world. Pinochet was part of the defender of the free world, according to the US foreign policy. The military junta in Argentina, and was part of the free world because they were anti-communist. That is what we are returning to with this regime's actions in Venezuela and in Latin America more broadly.
And then there's, on top of that, was it NATO this week?
There was a NATO conference this week.
There's lots that could be talked about it, particularly what the media has focused on. But yes, there is the praising and buddying up with Turkey's Erdogan, which should come as no surprise. And ending the ceasefire is part of it. And relaunching his fight with Denmark over Greenland, which is connected again to this Trump
and
Monroe Doctrine. And
this is the world that we are in right now. These things are happening right now. And the response to them, just to mangle and limit and, wreck anybody's dreams for a better world by jamming it into some horse race. It just blows my mind.
And this is without even talking about the monumental, almost indescribable impact, the sheer devastation and mass murder caused by the USAID cuts. That, we definitely need to do more coverage on the show about that. But you have to mention what this dismantling has meant in terms of life and death. And so refusing to face this reality is unconscionable. And accommodation and conciliation with this fascism is immoral. And that is what we are doing when we aren't demanding that the regime must go. In our latest statement for Refuse Fascism, we write, the danger is not only what the regime is doing, it is the millions who oppose fascism, adjusting to and being conditioned to adapt to each new outrage, to tell themselves that the midterms or someone else will stop this, to learn to live with what they once swore they would never accept. Going on later to say, those who insist that lobbying and midterms will solve this are asking people to place their hopes in a future the regime is actively working to foreclose. They are asking people to trust institutions that have failed to stop fascism's advance, and a Democratic Party that has repeatedly shown itself unwilling to wage the kind of struggle this moment demands. And one has to remember that all that has been done is pursuing institutional remedies, even when they had power, the Democrats, that have long been hollowed out or made into bludgeons of fascist atrocity. They did not transform. They didn't touch the Supreme Court.
No.
And currently, Black leaders in the South have continued to warn that their power is being decimated, and they have been abandoned by the Democratic Party.
Every state house across the South is now a fortress of white supremacy. That's what it is.
And so right now, those who are insisting that we rely on these normal channels are offering reassurance where alarm is needed, patience where resistance is needed, and the illusion of a painless way out where none such exists. The greatest service that can be rendered to the Trump regime is to convince people that someone else will stop it, that they can go along with their lives while fascism advances. And those directing people to place their hope in the next election are not preparing them to stop fascism. They're preparing them to live with it. And for all of you, who don't want to live with it, now is the time to go and make some noise about this. We need to be unrelentless.
Unrelenting and relentless.
Oh, yes. That's it. On why, we need a growing Trump must go now culture that permeates all of society. Mm-hmm. That is past time for it, but now we'll have to do. I think that a situation could emerge, especially in the attempts for this regime to steal the midterms or something like that, where millions could refuse to cooperate and pour into the streets. And if that moment comes, there is a big question of, is there going to be a force capable of demanding and leading others in demanding and settling for nothing less than the removal of the Trump fascist regime? Or is that going to be another blip, another episodic resistance that then gets funneled back and people are then, the next election? I think that is exactly why everybody who's listening, maybe we challenged you, maybe we gave you some fuel,
hopefully,
to help drive your effort forward. Maybe what we said made you really uncomfortable. I just think that you need to sit with that. And if this did resonate, be part of getting Trump Must Go Now seen everywhere. Be part of planting that pole and inspiring people. This is the dividing line between accepting this fascism or stopping it. That is why we need you, if you're listening, to be spreading this episode, to be spreading this demand, and whether it's getting a lawn sign and doing banner drops or getting into good struggle with the people that you love who are right now accommodating when they need to be resisting.
Yeah. There is the fascist propaganda. There is the propaganda coming out saying the only thing you can do is vote. I just also want to say some of the most effective propaganda, I think, that's negatively affecting people right now is when we're having these conversations and people are like, just chill out.
Yeah. So
tell them no, don't chill. Don't chill out.
You need to calm down.
Yeah, it's a bad situation where, just that
one word
can be so destructive to the kind of energy and spirit and work that needs to happen right now.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're listening and if you listen this far, I think that I really appreciate you. And I think that we really have to internalize the fact that no, there's no chill here.
Yeah, there is no chill, and this is I hate to be history will judge, because we don't know if there will be history, because there may not be humanity if we don't stop this. But look, if there's future generations, they're going to look back on us like every generation, has looked back on those pivotal times. We look back at those who fought to abolish slavery, who, let's be clear, who are maligned, who are told to be patient. And we look back on those who fought to abolish slavery and we honor their courage because they refused to accept the world as it was.
Enough of them did. Loudly enough.
Incessantly enough. And they refused to accept anything less than the end of slavery. They didn't go and be like, we got to stop the slave catchers. They went for, we have to stop
the slave system.
And on the other side, we look back at those who watched fascism rise in Nazi Germany, who convinced themselves someone else would stop it, or largely they convinced themselves that it wasn't that bad.
Right.
that the worst that they imagined could never happen. And they looked away as unspeakable crimes unfolded. And history has judged them with brutal clarity, as we should. And one day, people are going to look back at us and they're going to wonder what we did when a fascist movement consolidated power in the most powerful, most heavily armed country on earth. And the judgment has not yet been written, but we are writing it every day. We have enormous responsibility, not only to ourselves, not only to the people we love, but to future generations, to humanity, to livable ecosystems, to not let us fail them. And this is not the end of the story. If there is even a chance, as long shot as our strategy is, if there is even a chance to stop this, we should be throwing all in.
Yep.
So with that, I just want to echo Mark's thank you. Thank you for listening to Refuse Fascism. If you value the show, help us expand its reach, become a patron, become a subscriber on Substack, or pick up merch like a Refuse Fascism hat to support the movement and spread the movement. Links to do all those things are in the show notes. And there are very important ways to help that cost absolutely nothing. Share this episode with friends and family, rate and review that podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Subscribe to our Substack for free. Help the algorithm by commenting on our post. I think that does something. And recommend it to others. Recommend Substack to others. Stay connected. Get involved at refusefascism.org. Follow at Refuse Fascism on social media. You can also text REFUSE to 855-755-1314 to join. Much appreciation, as always, to Richard Marini and Lena Thorne for helping produce this episode. Until next time, in the name of humanity,
We refuse to accept a fascist America.